Hi, everybody. I can see that the numbers joining has slowed down a bit, so I think that's a good indication that we can kick off. I'm Helen Kennedy. I'm Professor of Digital Society at the University of Sheffield. I'm Director of the ESRC Digital Good Network, and in that capacity, I'm the designated Principal Investigator of the Public Voices in AI project. But please note this is a very collaborative endeavour involving the institutions that you can see at the bottom of the screen. That's the Ada Lovelace Institute, the Alan Turing Institute, the Digital Good Network, Elgon Social Research. We're funded by RAI UK and also UCL and Sheffield, as mentioned. Public Voices in AI aims to ensure that people, the public voices are front and centre of AI uses, developments, deployments, research and policy making. This is our launch event. You're going to hear about some of the reasons that we think doing such work matters, some of the challenges for doing such work, and you're going to hear about our Public Voices in AI Fund, which we launched last week, which is now open for people to apply to. So with that said, I am going to hand over to my colleague Susan Oman at the Digital Good Network and at Sheffield, who's going to chair the event.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone. So we've had our welcome and introduction from Helen. We're going to start by hearing from Rima Patel about people in the loop, why indeed include the public, before moving on to other colleagues at around 1:15. So I'm charged with keeping everyone to time, so I've got to be strict. So anyway, I'd like to hand over to Rima. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rima Patel. I'm co-investigator of Public Voices in AI and also co-investigator of the Digital Good Network. Next slide, please. So why include the public? Firstly, Public Voices in AI stand on the shoulder of prior work. It's part of a much broader field of public engagement in science and technology policy. And this established tradition has rejected the notion of the deficit model, which is that experts, as you can see on the left-hand side of this diagram, are very much on top, and society must receive the expertise and information and be told what to do. And this has been often critiqued, and so what we have now is the dialogue model, which is very much looking at the role and the contribution that society, people, trade, industry, policymakers collectively make towards the field of public engagement in science and technology policy, but also towards directing how science and technology policy works. AI is undoubtedly dramatically transformative, has the potential to have huge implications for the ways in which we live and work. And so this dialogue model is the model or the basis for further exploration. Now this talk spoke briefly about people in the loop. So people in the loop of AI, yes, but there's another framing which is really worth considering, which is about AI in the loop of society. And that's the framing that I'd like to invite you all to consider. Next slide. So why? Why should people be in the loop, and why should AI be in the loop for society? On the right-hand side, back in the day when I was studying philosophy, I read Ludwig Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigation. And one of the things that really struck me was this image on the right-hand side. And I often introduce this image and I ask people to look at it and tell me what they see. And about half of the room will say that they see a duck, and the other half of the room will say that they see a rabbit. And there will always be a minority that say they see something else completely different. And it's just a simple diagram, but I think it really illustrates that some of the simplest diagrams can, effectively demonstrate how different people see things differently. And so here, the key point is that AI needs to be more effective for people in society. And so the ability to include public voices enhances our ability to understand AI effects, so that it is, impacting. So the ability to include public voices enhances our ability to understand AI's impact on the world, so it is much more responsible and effective. And the duck rabbit phenomenon is a good illustration of that. Next slide. The other angle, which is about the way in which the people and the public live and experience AI from totally different standpoints. So what does it mean to include, given that the public is not homogeneous? And here the diagram Whitehead rainbow illustrates the wide range of individual, social, community, and environmental factors that shape the public experiences in really different ways. So if we're looking at this duck and rabbit phenomenon, we're looking at it from different standpoints. We're looking at it from the standpoint of our individual experiences. We're looking at it from the standpoint of social and community networks and our different environmental factors. So it's really important to include the public in AI so that AI itself can be designed to account for these different experiences for equity and for well-being. Next slide. Last but absolutely not least, AI itself being much more legitimate and trustworthy. And so we've seen many examples of initiatives that have been released out in the world, and the social impacts and social implications haven't necessarily been fully thought through. And as a result, we've seen techlash, a real pushback against the users of AI. And in terms of kind of thinking about this point, which is about AI in the loop of society, how do we ensure that AI itself serves social goals and social values? That's the really key question that we need to be focusing on. So those are the three key reasons for why inclusion when it comes to public voices of AI really matters. Next slide. In terms of the ways in which we might want to think about this, we might want to draw from Sherry Arnstein's Ladder of Citizen Participation, written initially in the 60s. And Arnstein's work had been turned into a spectrum. So when we're looking at low power and low agency, we are very much looking at that deficit model that I spoke about at the beginning, that idea that if you just inform the public that this is the right thing to do, the public would naturally be bought in. But Arnstein was rightly really critical of that. So it's really important to think about ways to shift power and increase agency when it comes to the use and deployment and development of AI. And there's different approaches, but essentially consultation, involvement, collaboration, and empowerment all move towards increased levels of power and agency when we're thinking about public voices in AI. Next slide. So how then do we think about power itself? And power is a challenging concept to grapple with. But broadly speaking, there's 4 different ways to think about power. One is power over, and historically and institutionally, power over has often been exercised, and that has resulted in that techlash that I spoke about. Another approach is power with, so working with and co-producing technologies with people. That's another way of thinking about power. A third way is about thinking about power to, so power to do certain things, to shape and change and articulate our vision for the world. And that power too is about the individual and the collective agency that people gain when they are able to say what they would like to see when it comes to the use of AI. And last but not least, there's power within, the ability to realize our own agency and our own power in order to be able to shape that vision in the world at large. I wanted to say that I'm really influenced by this power cue for participation, which comes from John Gaventer's work at the Institute for Development Study. And what he basically says is that there's different ways of configuring and really designing participatory processes. So there's different levels, global, national, local, the different types of spaces that are closed, invited, and claimed or created. And then there are different forms. There's the very visible, hidden, invisible form of participation. And it's pointed that it's almost like a Rubik's Cube. You can sort of organize these components in really different ways. And that, of course, is what we're really interested in exploring through this work. So I'll leave you with these thoughts and hand on to my colleagues who will be able to share more about their practice and their experience in designing some of these different types of spaces and forms of participation and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rima. Okay, so if we could now hand over to Helen Marget, of Alan Turing Institute, Octavia Reeve of Ada Lovelace, and Jack Stilgo of UCL and Responsible AI UK. Helen, I believe we're kicking off with you, if that's all right.
Yes, thanks so much, Susan. And I'm going to start by talking about the research we want to, the survey work we're planning to do, which is at the low agency, low power end of what Rima was talking about. And here, I guess what we're at the bottom of Arnstein's ladder. We're kind of trying to understand and gather information from people to try and get some initial understanding of what public voices are saying about AI and how people are experiencing it. Next slide, please. So I guess our starting point here is a survey that we carried out in 2022 by I mean the Ada Lovelace Institute and the Alan Turing Institute, where we tried to do exactly what I said, I guess, to understand a kind of public voices from a quantitative point of view, where the emphasis is on a large number of voices to try and get a snapshot of the country. This was a survey of 4,000 participants. The fieldwork was carried out in November and December in 2022. And we asked people about 17 applications of AI that they either might have come across or might have heard about, like autonomous vehicles, for example, or might have actually experienced, like, say, having their claim for their application for a loan assessed or something like that. I guess I don't want to talk about that now, but I guess I'd pull two things out which are represented in this graph you can see. One is that there was a kind of measure of positivity that came out of this survey. We found that out of the 17 applications that we asked about, 11 of them, people were more positive than negative. They saw more benefits than they saw concerns about those technologies. And the second point I want to make is that people have very sophisticated views. They could see benefits. For example, the assessing the risk of cancer was the application that people were most interested, sort of saw most benefit for. But at the same time, 88% of people were kind of saw that as a big benefit of that application. But they also, at the same time, saw concerns, even in the things that they saw benefits in. So, for example, in terms of assessing the risk of cancer, they had concerns about, what did it mean for professional roles like doctors and radiologists and so on? Would they kind of lose the ability to do this? Would it mean deprofessionalization and so on? So, sophisticated views and kind of broadly positive. Next slide, please. And first of all, I just wanted to say what are some of the positive things we hope for here, following on from this survey that we will do as part of this project. Won't be the same as that one, but these are some of the positive things that came out of that we hope to be able to get here. One is that kind of representative snapshot of the country. There's kind of snapshot of how society as a whole is interacting with this, as Rima said, potentially transformative technology. We want to be able to understand some of the group level differences, or the kind of social group differences that Rima talked about. How are some groups, for example, we found quite distinctive differences according to age in this survey, with older people having quite distinct experiences from younger groups. At the same time, there's that individual experience. How are people's specific kind of combination of demographic and socioeconomic characteristics shaping their experience of these technologies? Quantifiable metrics on people's perceptions of benefits and concerns. As I said, that kind of idea of getting a nuanced view of how people understand the benefits and the concerns of specific AI technologies and applications. That makes, for a very interesting picture, it also takes a long time to ask people about lots of different concerns, benefits, and applications, so it's a challenge. Uncovering patterns and trends, if we can possibly ask some things that we and people in other surveys have asked, we start to get a picture of change over time of this relatively new technology. And also, we went to the field in November 2022, which happens to be exactly when GPT was launched. So we didn't have a hope really to ask about that, but this time we must talk about that more general purpose technology, generative AI and large language models. So that will be something we would hope to be able to get. And finally, questions of what people want governments or public agencies to do about it. We did ask a general question here about what would make people feel more comfortable with AI, and over 60% said laws and regulations governing technology. That's a very important figure to be able to, particularly if you're talking to an anti-regulatory minister or something like that, which I'm sure people on this call have, then you want to be able to quote those kind of figures that show that people do want some kind of control of these technologies. Next slide, please. And finally, the challenges of doing something like this, the things that we've got to try and overcome if we want to get a useful picture out of this survey work. One of them is the complexity in defining AI. It's really difficult to say what is AI. Nobody agrees on it, not even experts agree on it. And what we tried to do here is kind of take tangible applications that we could ask people about, that they would kind of understand what was going on, much more than this kind of rather abstract, what is AI kind of question. However, we still had to tell them that we were talking about this bunch of technologies known as artificial intelligence. It would have been a kind of trick or cheat not to. So that is something that still has to be done, that kind of complexity in deciding how to put that definition. It can be very difficult to reach certain groups. We didn't do everything online last time, and we won't last time, but it's difficult and expensive to meet people, to speak to people who are really digitally excluded, and that's something to overcome. It can be overcome, but it tends to be expensive. Talking to underrepresented groups in any population, minoritized groups, and some quite large groups, it can be difficult to reach with this kind of research. If you look at the notes on the survey we did last time, the question of race we felt was very difficult to deal with the kind of numbers and methodology that we had, and that's something that we want to overcome next time. Really difficult to conduct intersectional analysis with a quantitative survey. I think that is something that really we need qualitative work to direct at, or some kind of follow-on work. So that's a challenge. Survey length is a huge challenge. We can't ask about all the things we asked about last time because we pushed it to the max, and with the survey length, and we've got to include some understanding of generative AI, large language models. And finally, this question about personal experience. This isn't something you think about until you try and think about the questions in a survey. How do you ask people just about their personal experience? But then if you want to ask people about inequality, unfairness, bias, how do you phrase that question when the people you're talking to might not be in a group that is we traditionally thought of as biased. So that's a real challenge too. Do we ask about personal experience or a view for society as a whole? Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Helen. If I could pass over to Octavia Reeve now. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Susan. And thanks, Helen, as well. Just trying to get my video to, and there I am. Brilliant. So hello, I'm Octavia Reeve from the Ada Lovelace Institute, and I'm co-leading the evidence building strand of this programme with Helen. I'm going to follow on by thinking a bit about the role of this high agency and high power research with publics and what that can add to the evidence base. So Helen's talked about the issues and considerations that we'll identify through the quantitative research that we'll do. And what's really important for us is that we then follow on with and do complementary work with the evidence that points to the need for further exploration with communities. So through this project, we'll be developing participatory research to inform those evidence gaps and demonstrate the utility of these higher agency methods. That means engaging with people where they are. It means hearing their hopes and concerns in their own voices, and also co-creating to some extent research outcomes. So that participatory research is still in scoping. So today I'll be drawing from previous work by the Ada Lovelace Institute, principally 3 reports: the Citizens Biometric Council, Access Denied, and What Do People Think About AI? I'll drop the links to those reports in the chat once I finish talking, in case anyone's interested in following up. But really that's to demonstrate that these types of high agency methods enable researchers to understand not just what people think about specific uses of technology, but also why they think what they think, and also how they prioritize some of these very difficult trade-offs that come up. You'll see some quotes from participants over the next few slides. I'm not going to read them out as I go along, but they're there because public voice is central to this programme, and it's really important that people are represented. Next slide, please. Great. So the first research project I want to talk about is the Citizens Biometric Council. This was convened in 2020 to bring public voices into understanding potential benefits and harms from different uses of biometric technologies, and to propose proportionate regulation and governance. So this is a mini public or citizens jury. We've got 50 members of the public who met in Bristol and Manchester, and then online to learn about, to debate, to discuss, to deliberate, and finally to make recommendations for the future uses and governance of biometrics, and to ensure representation of those most minoritized and potentially most affected within the community. We also ran sessions with individuals from LGBTQ+, disabled and minority ethnic groups. So you can see the sort of drive towards inclusion in the methodology there. You can also see, I hope on the slide, quotes from participants, where you can see really the pragmatism that people bring to some of these questions, where people really felt changes were needed before they would be able to trust. And that trust is governments, it's private companies who are responsible for these technologies being implemented safely and in the public interest. So next slide, please. So this second research project is Access Denied. It's a partnership with the Health Foundation. It was looking at health inequalities and data-driven systems. And the project uses peer ethnography, which stands for Participatory Ethnographic Evaluation and Research. It involves training members of the public to interview people in their own communities. It can enable researchers to reach people who are often out of reach of traditional research methods, and to understand their concerns through co-designing the research. So where we were talking about high and low power, some of the power comes in the methods. It's a collaborative approach. It includes knowledge sharing, and it includes co-production of the work of the research questions. So again, you can see a few quotes here from participants that show how this method really locates people in their communities. It enables researchers to hear the concerns from their perspective. So you can see that not everyone can afford smartphone data, and the insights coming through that the observation that actually this mechanism that doctors are using is something, but it's not healthcare. And these are really important insights that shape the direction of the research, and I hope give you a sense of what can be learned from this kind of research as well. So participants in this project had real concerns about not being consulted, not being informed about new digital health services. And overall, the project found that digital health services are being designed and implemented without consideration of lived experience of some groups, and particularly of those who are digitally excluded. So these are the sorts of insights that you can get out of using these kind of methods. So next slide, please. So you can see on this slide just a few of the findings from Ada's participatory work about data and AI. And I think these findings demonstrate how well publics can understand complex issues, how they can relate their own experiences to existing protections like rights. They can think about ecosystem level solutions. They can set principles for policy and industry developers. And these methods can also bring legitimacy and trustworthy and accountability to decision-making processes, so publics can be meaningfully involved in decisions about AI. And making this happen requires a commitment from decision makers as well to embed these participatory processes in development practices. So as well as providing new evidence about what different people think and feel about different uses of AI, we hope and intend that this new project, Public Voices in AI, will explore and inform opportunities for policymakers and technology developers to listen to and to engage with the views of the public, particularly those who are currently underrepresented in the evidence, so that they can navigate effectively this complex and very fast-moving world of AI that we all find ourselves in. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Jack to explain how we'll be exploring the perspectives of AI researchers.
Thanks, Octavia. Hi all. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your questions already. If I could encourage people to keep going with the Q&A, that would be great. So it just if I could go to the next slide, just to try and contextualize some of this. So I speak as somebody who is a member of the Responsible AI leadership team. Responsible AI is a £30 million research council project program. Over the next 5 years, we will be, next 4 years now, we've done a year, we will be supporting a massive range of interdisciplinary research in and around AI. And the Public Voices program will speak to that and try in a modest way to democratize not just that program, but the ecosystem, emerging British ecosystem of AI research. Rima has spoken a bit about the sort of models that those of us with experience in public participation have been working with for years, decades. Octavia has spoken about some of the practices, and again, there's been a huge amount of innovation in the doing of public participation. But for me, as somebody working with the AI community, I think we shouldn't be naive that this will just be an easy sell, right? I think those of us that have been in and around AI debates the last few years know that a relatively small group of relatively loud self-appointed experts have been shaping the debate in ways that might not necessarily reflect public values. And therefore, the challenge of democratizing that debate is a real one. You know, a few different actors, us included within the Responsible AI team, have been using words like responsible, trustworthy AI. I noticed in the Q&A that Juhi has put a question there about how we define legitimacy, right? And I think those of us involved in public participation would recognize that there are no answers, no consensus on those definitions. And we should be skeptical of attempts by powerful actors to tell us what it means to do AI responsibly, legitimately, or to tell us what we should and shouldn't trust. So there will be barriers. There will be barriers to opening up AI. There will be barriers that we encounter as people trying to introduce public voice into the debate. Those of us that have been involved in public participation, a lot of that work, you know, developed around other technologies, in particular biotechnologies, and the communities of research and regulation around those have come to sort of build their own capacity for democracy in those circumstances. With AI, we're starting from a much lower base. That a lot of those communities do not have the same experience of engaging with regulators of hearing what the public have to say and taking their perspectives seriously, which means that there's a lot of work of capacity building to be done. There are new organizations, new regulatory bodies to work with. There are new policy audiences to persuade, and we'll be trying with this program to do all of that. Just one quick note before I pass on, just to say that another part of the program that we will be doing is a survey of AI researchers that tries to understand their perspectives on not just what they regard as publicly important issues, but how AI researchers see the public and the potential for their participation, so that we've got a sense of what the gaps are between public views and the views of the scientists and innovators, which will help us inform our future approaches. I will stop there and hand over. I forget who I'm handing over to. Susan, help me.
It's me temporarily, but we're about to hand over to Helen Kennedy, Helen 1, to talk about the fund. So yes, welcome back, Helen. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Susan and others. So we've heard about why it's important to include public voices in AI. We've heard about how to include public voices in AI, and we've heard about some of the challenges of doing that. So having heard that context, I'm now going to tell you a little bit about our project, Public Voices in AI, and then I'm going to proceed to tell you about our Public Voices in AI fund. Okay, so as I said at the outset, we aim to ensure that public voices are front and centre in AI uses, research, development, policy. So we have 5 short-term objectives, things that we hope to see, that we intend to see happen by the time we finish the work that we're doing. And I'm going to tell you about them sort of explicitly. Sorry that these are quite wordy slides, but I think it's important that you know what it is that we're trying to do. So we would like there to be increased understanding of public views and public experiences of AI among AI specialists, experts, whatever we might want to call them, including researchers, developers, and policymakers. So we want them to understand public views and experiences, especially those of underrepresented groups who are differentially impacted by AI, as Rima said at the outset. And given that there is a need for the equity-driven approach that we're taking on this project, and that we would argue always needs to be taken because of the ways in which structural inequities mean that people are differently positioned in relation to AI. People have different access to power to influence AI, and often the already marginalized, minoritized, or disadvantaged communities are those who are most negatively impacted by AI, and therefore might have the best ideas about how to take AI forward. So increased understanding of public experiences, especially from those groups that are most negatively affected. That's number 1. So the second thing that we hope to see happen is that there's increased understanding of the value of meaningful inclusion of public voice amongst these AI experts, and that they feel like they have the capacity to do so. So we want AI researchers, developers, and policymakers to be engaging more systematically with public voice, research, and knowledge and findings. Next slide, please. Third, we hope to have demonstrated good practice in how to engage underrepresented communities in developing, co-designing and producing AI public voice research. So we're going to do some of that good practice and produce resources to enable others to do good practice. The fourth thing that we hope to achieve is that people from underrepresented groups have participated in AI research, development and policy making, and in shaping this project that we're talking about now. And that some members of the public, especially from underrepresented groups, have developed their capabilities to engage meaningfully in AI research, development and policy making. So in addition to those 5 short-term objectives, we have one desired longer-term impact, which is on the next slide, please, which we may not get to in the duration of the project, but is one of our longer-term aims, and that is that public voice informs AI research, AI development and deployment, AI policy making. That there's more engagement from AI research developers and policymakers with people affected by AI, and more public voice evidence cited in policy documentation and industry codes of practice. So this is the shift that we want to see happen through the work that we're doing on the Public Voices in AI project. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This is what we're doing. And you may have kind of gathered this from the things that other people have already said. So there is quite a lot of research already underway, or activity already underway. So the first thing we're doing is reviewing what we already know about public attitudes to and engagement in AI. That's number one. Secondly, as Helen and Octavia described, and Jack talking about the expert survey, we are identifying and responding to gaps in what we know about public attitudes to and engagement in AI. We're going to produce and share resources for including members of the public in AI, and this is work undertaken by 2 team members, David Leslie and Vari Aitken from the Turing Institute, who haven't spoken today, but they're responsible for this production of resources to support people, to enable people to feel they have the methods capability to include public voices in the AI work that they do. We want to bring all of this work that we're doing and all of the learning that we do together in an AI participation framework, building on the shoulders of that spectrum of participation from Arnstein that Rima showed us early on. And as we have all indicated throughout, we want to ensure that equity is at the centre of everything we do. So we want to address these issues that arise from structural inequities, centre underrepresented groups, marginalised groups, minoritised or disadvantaged groups. So with that in mind, if we can move to the next slide, one way in which we will achieve our aims is by distributing some of the funding that we have received through our Public Voices in AI fund. So we have around 170,000 to distribute, and we are inviting applications for projects that are funded up to 50,000. We would like to fund 4 to 6 projects, but of course it depends how much the total costs of the kind of best ranked projects are. So we're inviting applications for projects which seek to ensure that uses of AI are informed by the voices of communities underrepresented in or negatively impacted by AI. So very much centred on that equity question. We invite applications from projects which are led by organisations in the voluntary, community and social enterprise sector. So organisations that are led by or work with groups and people negatively affected by or underrepresented in AI. We invite applications for projects which explore or employ new ways of engaging these communities in dialogue about how AI is used and implemented, and that address the impacts of AI on underrepresented groups. Next slide, please. So conditions of projects is that it must be a form of participation or participatory research that goes beyond merely consulting towards involving and empowering groups and communities so they're able to affect change. So we're inviting applications at the high agency, high power end of the spectrum that Rima showed to us all and that we've talked about throughout. So it's participatory and not the sort of low-end agency surveying type project that we're going to fund with our fund. We are in existence for 1 year. We are funded by RAI UK. We must finish our work by March 2025. We recognise that it's really important to have trusting relationships with communities to undertake participatory work well. And so we ask that proposals build on existing work or existing relationships with underrepresented communities, because we're realistic that it would be impossible to start from scratch now and get something valuable done by the time we have to wrap everything up at the beginning of 2025. So that's a condition. Proposed activities must aim to address unequal power dynamics between underrepresented groups and AI decision makers, and be undertaken in ways that foster equitable and ethical participatory work. Next slide, please. So because of our tight timeline, proposals can build on existing activities which are already being undertaken. So they might seek to improve or advance methods already in use. They might seek to scale up activity already underway. They might seek to support the dissemination or amplify impact. So they can build on stuff that is already happening, which again is aligned with the kind of tight timeline that is somewhat out of our control. So next slide, please. So some technical logistic information. We launched the call last Friday. The deadline for submission is Wednesday, the 3rd of July. Again, we appreciate this isn't much time, but it is about us trying to get everything done in the time that we've been given. We will communicate our decisions by the end of July. We will spend August on logistics, contracts, and so on. And so we're looking for projects that will take place between the beginning of September and the end of December of this year. So that's in a 4-month period. We'll ask for an output in January of 2025. We'll negotiate the form that takes depending on the project. And then we'll have an event where we pull everything together that we've done and that fund recipients have done before the end of March 2025. And you can see on this slide how to find information online. Go to digitalgood.net, go to opportunities, and then find the Public Voices in AI Fund. And that's everything that I wanted to say before handing back to Susan.
Thank you very much, Helen. If I could welcome back all of the panelists, please, for a Q&A. If everyone on the Zoom call could continue to add questions to the Q&A, we will do our best to answer them all. So I'm going to start with a question that, in fact, Octavia's already volunteered to answer for us. So Mike Thomas says, not a question per se, but would love to arrange for panellists to come and speak at Welsh Government's internal cross-sector AI policy group. So I think Octavia has agreed to answer this question nice and quickly.
I actually agreed to answer it by clicking the wrong button. But I am delighted to answer it nevertheless. I can't speak for everybody on the call, but this is definitely a programme that wants to have real world impact and influence. So I think we'd be very happy to do that. And please do extend an invitation. Thank you very much.
That seems like an appropriate answer on behalf of us all. Thank you very much, Octavia. Okay, so I think what we will do is try and address some of the questions about the ethics of the project before moving on to the fund, making sure that we have got enough time to answer questions about the fund. So Flynn Devine asks, in what ways do you plan to turn the outputs from the varying public engagements into real, meaningful impact on key decisions? So I think this question appeared before Helen summarised our aims and objectives. But would someone from the panel like to answer this question? Go for it, Rima.
Yes, so Helen did speak about the long-term impact and very much recognising that this is a short-term project. So I think that that's something that we're really aware of in terms of articulating the theory of change for this work, but also recognising the constraints and the limitations with a one-year project. My own experience with public engagement initiatives and activities in terms of impact is that impact on the participants who are supported and invested in and funded, and the organisations who are invested in to be able to undertake work. So the focus of that fund is really very much about supporting initiatives underway to scale their impact. That framing is in there, and also to do activities such as the activities that Octavia mentioned around investing in organisation, so that they are able to undertake research themselves and share knowledge, expertise and best practice. We also have a series of sort of knowledge exchange activities envisaged, including blogging, including communicating through conferences and events. So there's a sort of wider impact on research ecosystem and on AI policy and AI implementation itself. So in terms of the way we're thinking about impact, it is very much about making the best use of the time that we have available, and also mobilizing a wider group and coalition of actors. One other observation is obviously the timing of this work and this activity. It does take place against the backdrop of a election, which is imminent, and potential change in government. You never know, but you know, there are likely to be key avenues for influencing and shaping the future of policy and the direction of travel of policy, and that's again something else that we're thinking about.
Thanks, Rima. Helen, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, just to say, I mean, as the others have said, that is a long-term goal, and there's a limited amount that can happen in a year. But I do think the work package that Octavia and I were talking about, and also Jack, is about evidence building. And if you want to have impact on evidence is valued in the policy-making world, and I think there are quite a lot of examples where it can be very valuable to have a piece of evidence to put in front of policymakers when they're trying to make a decision about something. So I think there are also short-term ways that work like this can make its way into real-world impact. Of course, the longer-term goal, I mean, we're talking about, and we've had many discussions about this, we're kind of talking about the responsible AI community, but there's a whole community of developers, of scientists, of researchers who don't think about these issues so much. And I guess part of what Jack's expert survey is aiming to do is to try and kind of understand a bit how much they do use evidence about public attitudes and experiences in their work. And the next step from that is trying to think what we might do about it and how we might encourage them to use it more, because we suspect we won't find huge evidence that it's being used as much as we would want.
Thanks, Helen. Moving on to a question from Anna Beckett, who asks, are there particular sectors that we're interested in, given the survey findings from Octavia that views of AI can vary significantly? I can't see anyone claiming. Okay, thanks, Helen.
I will give that a go. We are not prioritizing sectors ourselves. I think if people want to, I think this is about, I'm not sure if this is about the fund or about us, our work in general. In terms of the fund, I think it's up to applicants to make a case that a sector is important and that it matters. In terms of the work that we will do, I do think that is probably one of the many challenges that Helen M and Octavia are grappling with in terms of the survey. We can't cover everything. We want to prioritise that which matters. It would be great to prioritise that which is going to matter tomorrow. That's quite hard work. I don't know if Helen M or Octavia have got anything to say about how you're approaching that in the survey. Helen M? Well, I would. It's difficult to point to real, because we couldn't, although we had 17 applications, that's still not enough to have, you know, several in each sector. I think the key differences we found actually were about specific technologies, like the technologies that seem to evoke the most resistance are robotics. So the kind of three negative ones were the people seem to feel more negative about were robotic care assistants, autonomous weapons and driverless cars.
And you can see that cuts across sectors actually, but there seems to be something about robotics that people are worried about. And given how kind of fast moving the trends in robotics are at the moment, I think that makes it important to ask about that in some way. But as Helen says, I'm not convinced that we should be focusing on specific sectors anywhere in the project.
Thank you, Helen and Helen. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions about international teams. So I think it's probably worth flagging that this fund is for UK-based teams and projects, and the eligibility criteria that I think we've made available by linking to it does state that all teams must be based in the UK. But there have been some other questions about teams. So one question from Lucia asks, would organisations be able to apply in partnership, i.e. they bring different skills and resources and are willing to work together? Would someone like to take that question?
I'm happy to take that question because the answer is a simple yes, but I won't leave it at that. I do want to flag that once again, in the interest of expediency, we have kept this to UK only, and that addresses, I think, a couple of the questions in the Q&A from people working in international teams or on international projects. But please be aware that the Digital Good Network has a fund, the Digital Good Research Fund, and a commitment to sort of international perspectives. And so there'll be a call again towards maybe the end of this year, beginning of next year. RAI UK distributes funding. There are other initiatives underway that are distributing funding for these matters that are more able to be international because they're longer timelines or have priorities in that area as well. So I do think it's important for people to look elsewhere for these great international projects that they're talking about.
Thanks, Helen. Tanya asks, the slide says AI research, development and policy making. You also mentioned deployment and presumably this includes use. And does policy making includes other forms of governance? Is research seen as separate to what might be done in innovation labs, which could potentially also be seen as development? She says, I guess I'm asking to be clear how important and set these three areas are as they require different methods. So I think Jack's already offered to respond to that, and then Helen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. I mean, I think one of the truly interesting things about AI is that the lines between research, development, and deployment are not clear, and that actually a lot of the research happens in the real world, and the real world becomes the laboratory and the public become experimental subjects in a sort of in a profound and complicated way for those of us interested in democracy. So the hope is that we will offer things that are relevant to the innovation, which I guess includes all of that, and the regulation of those things. And that there will be feedbacks between the innovation and the regulation, recognizing that all of this is moving quickly, and that regulations are still in the making in a few places. So our hope would be that we are of relevance to all of those things. I'm resisting getting into a more complicated discussion about how regulation itself shapes innovation, but Helen will be able to help me.
No, I'm definitely not going to talk about that, Jack. What I'm going to say instead is to, yes, agree with what you say, and also to say, our answer to that question is an inclusive one. So yes, I can't see the question now. It's already been moved by our very efficient helpers there. But yes, deployment also means use. Yes, policy making also means other forms of governance. Yes, we're talking about research in innovation labs as well. So, interpret our list of AI things as inclusively as you can. And as Jack says, the lines between them are not that clear. It's our attempt to list all of the AI things that we are focusing on here. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to say one or two more things because I think it quickly addresses a couple of the other questions that are asked there. So Daniel Hutt asks, is the funding for research only? or for the development of AI co-design with underrepresented communities as well. It definitely isn't for research only. We hope we made that clear. We talk about projects and activities, not about research. So it isn't for research only. And then I think also to address the question by anonymous attendee, do applicants need to be a civil society organisation, or can they be academic researchers working in collaboration with a civil society organisation? Applications need to be led by a VCSE, voluntary community or social enterprise. So they need to be led by those groups. It is possible to include academic researchers, but as a bunch of us are in universities, we're very well aware that universities' timelines for processing applications administratively and financially would probably not fit into the 5 weeks that you have to apply here. And we're really sorry about that, but we're not sorry about giving the money to cash-strapped civil society organisations that are doing fantastic work. This is our way of ensuring that such organisations are included in this project. And, you know, it isn't often that academic funds are available only to such groups. So that's a bit of a rationale for the decisions that we've made there.
Thanks, folks. Okay, Cara Christine asks, what formats would it be exciting for us in terms of communications of outputs or learning from these groups? They're a disability arts organisation collaborating with Edinburgh Uni and Braid, and they're thinking about how to distill these experiences of pupils with mainstream and ASN. So are they, you know, what kind of things are we looking for? I think that might be helpful to hear.
You're muted.
So, I mean, I think that there's something really interesting actually about arts-based approaches in terms of their capacity to empower people to articulate some of their lived experiences. So there's another project actually I'm working on, which is looking at things like theatre-based approaches, creative illustration. I think that Helen made the point earlier on, which is that we're not confining this to reports as such. You know, there's a wide range of approaches. Video ethnography or video outputs could be a really interesting approach. I've seen animation, I've seen illustrations that are being used and deployed in different contexts alongside the participatory work and activity. So just to reiterate Helen's point, interpret that as well as being inclusive, and think about who it is that you are working with, or who, you know, in terms of if you yourself are impacted by minoritization, the format in which you would want your message to be heard. I think that that's really important as well. So how do you want to convey that message is more important as a question, rather than looking at like specifically narrow or defined perspectives. And for people who are really interested, you know, innovative approaches that have been used worldwide have included things like forum or legislative theatre. So have a look and think about that. But I think there's a really long tradition of arts-based approaches, as well as more conventional research approaches that would be included within the framing of this call.
Thanks, Rima. To move back to some of the questions about the project rather than the funds or the call, a simple question that I think is probably quite helpful to answer is, what are the timescales for the research already underway, particularly the survey results? So I guess that's probably for Helen M.
Thanks. Yes. Well, at the moment, we're in the process of talking. Well, we've been having some initial conversations with survey companies, then really important, we're talking to other research council investments and policymaking organisations that run surveys, such as the Office of National Statistics and Ofcom, the regulator, and so on, because there are there are quite a lot of publicly funded surveys, and it's very important that this is synergistic with them, rather than in any way overlapping or doing the same thing. So that's important work. We're working on the tender document. We thought we might have a real problem with the tender document because of the election. We thought all the survey companies are going to be really busy, but as it happens, the timing is quite good for us because they're really busy now. So we will run a tender competition, and we would hope that we would go into the field in about September, and obviously report by the end of the year, and hope that some new release of a really dramatic and transformative large language model doesn't get released right in the middle of the field work like last time.
Thanks for dooming us already, Helen. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a question that I think is actually quite important for us to answer, which is from Debbie. Some of the communities most negatively impacted by AI are already suffering from consultation fatigue and a sense of feeling overused and overabused. So will taking part in this project be framed as a positive experience given the short-term nature of the funding and the short project window? Also, any thoughts on how to deal with real-world complexities around identity in place, for example, in Northern Ireland or border countries? So would anyone like to take that, or shall I designate to Rima? or Octavia? Okay, sorry, Octavia, I missed your hand.
That's okay. Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a particularly good question for this programme. It's obviously something that we're thinking about a lot in relation to the participatory work. And there are principles that we've put in place through this programme and all of the organisations who do this kind of research, of not being extractive, of being, respectful of people's time, of making sure that it is a positive experience for participants, making sure that participants get things out of the experience of being in the research, and often also making sure that those experiences are followed up. So it's not just a sort of short, sharp period of being involved in a research project. It's something that has long-term benefit for the participants who are involved. So all of those things are really important, and things that we would try to build into any sort of participatory research. Obviously, we are on a very short time frame for this project. That's a regular theme that's going to come up when anybody talks about it. In terms of the participatory research that we're going to do, obviously it has a relationship to the survey, so we really want to be building on themes that come out of the survey. We are going to need at some point to decide what and whom to prioritise. In terms of that, we really want to be thinking about those who are least represented, those who are most marginalised. We will have to choose whether we want to think about people in a particular location, whether we want to think about a particular use case. We haven't done that scoping yet, so I can't answer that question, but we will certainly be paying attention to the experience of participants all the way through the design.
Thanks, Octavia. I'm going to move on to a linked but different question, which is about whether the aim of participatory approaches is to foster consensus, to protect dissensus, disagreements, or both. And so I think that we have Jack here who's super keen to answer that question.
Yes, thanks, Omar. And I think this continues a conversation that we began yesterday, in fact, at the AI Fringe. So the consensus dissensus thing is really interesting, and we've already seen some people within the AI communities say things along the lines of, if only we had a consensus on what human values were, if only we knew what the public think. And this has been a tension within public participation work in general, but also in particular when it comes to science and technology. We have models like the Consensus Conference that actually works towards that sort of thing. But a lot of us who've been doing participatory practice have been emphasizing that actually one of the most important aims is to surface tension and dissensus, to understand antagonism rather than to presume that members of the public will all think the same, just as experts don't all think the same. So surfacing those tensions and those disagreements is going to be one of the really important things, and one of the justifications for doing deep qualitative work alongside our quantitative work is that you can get at exactly those sorts of differences. Octavia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree with all that, and it's one of the the sort of most interesting parts of doing this kind of participatory work. And I would say, just from a very sort of in the weeds research method approach, often the answer is both. So yes, you absolutely want to surface all of the different ideas, thoughts, feelings, hopes, concerns that people have. And you want to make sure that they're visible through the research. And when you're reporting on the research, you want all of that to be there, that rich complexity. Sometimes you're also trying to get to recommendations. So you're trying to get people to agree on prioritizing and what they think is most important. I mean, that's a different part of the process. So I would say both.
Thanks, Octavia. Okay, so another question, which is also a really interesting question. How are we considering the connection between worker voice and public voice? Do you see worker voice, participatory worker research, worker input into AI, research, policy, industry, etc., as being instances of public voice, or would you want to see the case being made for the connection between such worker voice and public voice? Octavia again. Is that a legacy hand?
That is a legacy hand, though I can answer if nobody else wants to.
I just assumed Jack would want to take this one, but
open it to the floor. I can answer.
Go, Octavia. Yeah.
Go on, Octavia. Yeah.
I think there's a really interesting exploration to be done between public voice and worker voice. Obviously, huge number of members of the public are workers. A huge amount of people who make technologies, who are workers in technologies, are also members of the public. So it's very hard to differentiate between all of these things. I think in sort of participatory research terms, often what we're trying to get to is a differential view that we can identify and say these people who have these interests or these concerns or these experiences have these particular hopes and concerns. So we would want to be differentiating possibly between different types of workers or different types of publics with different types of concerns. So sort of slightly methodological answer to set Jack up to say something else.
Well, to say something, but I think potentially it's extremely interesting. I'm assuming that the meaning behind the question is one of AI's impact on work, and therefore work as an important set of stakeholders in discussions about AI research and governance. I think there's the potential for all sorts of other conversations to happen around AI and work, which is that I would love to know what workers inside AI research think more. And I think, we're seeing debates about whistleblowers, about whether worker voice within tech companies is a vital contribution to this debate. So-called ghost workers, the hidden workers that help make AI systems, the hidden labor behind AI systems, are all really important, diverse perspectives that we might look to. So it sort of depends what you mean by workers. It's a complicated one, potentially very, very interesting.
I think so. Thank you very much. Okay, so our remaining questions. First of all, I feel that we've already answered, but let's just cover it just to be sure. How do you intend to make the connections with the communities who are often marginalised? Yes, Helen.
Yeah, Susan, I feel that we've answered that question as well. So I hope, but tell us if, Walt, if you think that we haven't. I hope that it's evident that through the fund is one way of making those connections. We will do, or the Ada Lovelace Institute will do a small high agency participatory piece of work. I think you could see from the examples of the work that they've done that they're already connected with those communities. A lot of us we are either from or working on projects with or aligned to those organisations, communities as well. So I hope it becomes evident that there is embeddedness already and that we're seeking to fund research that is also already embedded. But do shout, Walt, if you think we haven't fully answered that question.
Thank you. And again, I think this final question, I feel that we've already answered, but let's just make sure. If we want to take part as a public contributor or as a lay member of the public in any of the AI and public health related projects, where would we apply? Where would we get the opportunity? So I suppose we can't answer that beyond our fund. But I feel that we've answered that question in relation to the fund. Yeah. Okay. In which case, no more Q&A. I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for speaking and for answering all those questions. And I hope that in the chat there's a whole series of links to more information about the fund, the project, and watch this space, especially when it comes to things like releasing more information about the project as it unfolds. So thank you very much for coming and listening to us.